On today's show, because as you guys know, I only allow the most illustrious of guests on this show, Michael Baumann, writer for FanGraphs, formerly of The Ringer, joins the show to talk about Jackson Merrill's breakout season, whether or not it is going to continue, whether or not it was the most surprising thing ever seen by mankind, whether or not it could be replicated in any sense, and some NL West storylines, all that and more on today's Locked On Padres.
You are Locked On Padres, your daily San Diego Padres podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another edition of Locked On Padres podcast, which is part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day for Friday, February 28th. As always, I'm your host with sometimes, occasionally, but certainly not always the most, Javier Reyes. You can follow me on Twitter /X and Blue Sky at Javipeno, JAVIIPENO. Today's episode, before we get into it, is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Download the app or head to FanDuel.com to get started. And to get started with today's show, guys, I wasn't kidding before. Michael Baumann of FanGraphs is on the show. You might have been familiar with a lot of his work over at The Ringer as well. Previously, he is on the show because he recently wrote about Jackson Merrill. And I am a big fan of Jackson Merrill. This is a Padres podcast after all. But before we jump into all of that, Michael, how are you doing on this fine Friday?
I'm doing okay. How are you?
Doing pretty good, man. We're slowly getting into the start of the regular season. We're still at that point of people making the same joke that it's still spring training, but nonetheless, we are almost there. And I think that one of the things that's happening right now is I'm starting to slowly believe in my own team again, which is always not really a good sign, frankly. But you recently wrote about 4 FanGraphs about Jackson Merrill. That everybody could go check out the piece. It's very, very good. How Jackson Merrill can make his life easier. And you talked about the season that he had, as well as some comparisons, and we're going to talk about that for sure on this episode. Just to give everyone a reminder, last year, Jackson Merrill finished the season with a slash line of 292, 326, 500, a WRC plus of 130, and a FanGraphs wins above replacement level of 5.3. He finished second in Rookie of the Year, and if not for a tungsten arm O'Doyle type of season from Paul Skeens, probably would have run Rookie of the Year. Michael, I guess my first question is, what the hell? Like, like what happens? I don't understand how this team, who that frankly, with the exception of Fernando Tatis Jr., is usually pretty bullish on calling up prospects, but aside from Tatis, has never worked to this degree. What do you think is kind of not just what happened, but also what were your expectations of Merrill coming into the year?
They weren't this. I'll be completely honest. I expected him to struggle a little bit the way most rookies do it. I think Jackson Holliday is a pretty good example of someone that I was a lot higher on, kind of similar profile in terms of very young middle infielder coming up for his first taste of big league action, and he struggled. And to see Merrill do that well, to be a legitimate 5-WAR player as a 21-year-old rookie is incredible. And on top of that, while he was learning a new position, and moving from shortstop to center field is not, and center field is an easier position than shortstop. It requires a lot of the same physical tools, but still, it's a big adjustment. It's a lot to carry on your plate when you're still adjusting to major league pitching for the first time. So I was very, very impressed with what Merrill did. I think you saw how important he ended up being to that team, and he's very rapidly turned into somebody that they're going to have to rely on if they're going to make a return to the playoffs. So, I guess we can get into the piece. The piece is all of that said, he has a couple weaknesses in his game that kind of fascinate me. And one of them, chiefly, is a very, very low walk rate for a hitter with that much power. And having that much success as a rookie with a walk rate that low, it can either be a sign of he has a lot of room to grow, or it could be a sign that this is a fluke. I mentioned, I made a list in the piece of kind of similar hitters, maybe not of this quality, but had similarly low walk rate and similarly high WRC plus overall. And the list is Robinson Cano, who learned how to draw a walk and really control the strike zone about as well as anybody else in baseball. Eric Hosmer, who Padres fans are probably. Yeah, I think Merrill, if Merrill as a center fielder hits as well as Hosmer did as a first baseman, I think that's a really solid player. Michael Harris, who's an incredible defender, but took a step back with the bat when he got a little bit less batted ball luck. And Eloy Jimenez and Jose Tabata, who I don't know if you're old enough to remember the ill-fated Yankees and Pirates career of Jose Tabata, but that's not something that you want to. It's not a name you want to see on your list of comps for Jackson Merrill. So it's one thing to say that he needs to walk more.
Mm-hmm.
It's a very easy thing to say, and it's a very difficult thing to do. And what the next step that I went into was in the study of selective aggression, which is something, if you've read Robert Orr, Baseball Prospectus, he introduced a stat called Seeger, which measures a hitter's ability to identify and hit the pitches that he's, that he could do the most damage on. And this is distinct from, you think of somebody like Juan Soto, who's good at everything, but like you think of Juan Soto, him drawing a lot of walks, whereas somebody like Bryce Harper or Corey Seager, who the stat's named after, they both walk a lot, but they also swing and miss a lot, and they're very aggressive hitters. But the key to their offensive game is the ability to really punish their pitch when it comes along. And Merrill he's not in that level because maybe 10 guys in the world are.
Yeah.
But he's a 21-year-old who's shown a lot of skills. And, this is somebody who in a normal developmental curve would still be in AA, AAA, and he's already got a full season of Major League Baseball under his belt. So what I'm curious is, which direction does that go? Is this the best he's ever going to be? Is this the baseline? In which case, having a low walk rate can be, it just gives you less room to work with. That was sort of the premise of the article, is if you walk a lot, that just buys you time to, it buys you the ability to get out of slumps. Or maybe if you have a down power year, or you have bad batted ball luck, if you have an extra 20 or 30 points of OBP to fall back on, that can be a lifesaver. Or does he turn into a Corey Seager type hitter? And I think any of those outcomes are in play, and it's just a matter of what is he capable of in addition to what he showed us last season.
Look, if you told me that a player who finished 15th tied for 15th among all position players in wins above replacement, according to FanGraphs, that is the baseline, or frankly, if that's the ceiling, if that's just what he does every year, that's like a fringe, like Hall of Fame player, frankly. So that's pretty much what we're looking at. And speaking of Hall of Fame players, you also cited some in the article, 21 youngsters who posted a WRC plus of 120 or better in their rookie season. Mike Trout, Albert Pujols, Ronald Cody Jr., Cody Bellinger, but whatever. It was still, he's still a player, right? He's still a player.
You come up as a 21-year-old rookie, you put up 5 wins a year for the first 10 years of your season, or for first 10 years of your career. That's it. That's, if you have any kind of decline phase whatsoever, you're making the Hall of Fame. And so that underscores how good Merrill was last year, but also it underscores how difficult it's going to be for him to keep this up. And it's somebody who derived a lot of value from his defense. And again, walk rate under 5%. It's not fatal. It's certainly, I think there's probably even money, at least that he improves on that as he gets older. It's just, there's not a whole lot of room for him to regress. And if one or two things does fall out of his game, he could end up having, that sort of Cody Bellinger, mid to late 20s. But, my expectation is that he's going to be fine. He's going to be one of the best center fielders in the National League. It's just interesting to try to plot the course of a career, when you don't see guys start out this good, this young.
Absolutely. And we're going to continue talking about that, continue projecting and whatnot, all things Jackson Merrill, because it is Friday and I like having fun on Fridays. And talking about Jackson Merrill is always fun, but we need to take just a quick break, guys, to talk about one of our sponsors. And that sponsor is the always lovely folks over at FanDuel, when the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started, and there's no better place to get in on it than FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game, so even if you miss the opening tip-off or want to bet on a fourth quarter comeback, you can stay in the action. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay. And forget basketball for a second. We're talking about Jackson Merrill. You want to put some MVP odds on him? You can do that over at FanDuel. You want to sprinkle them into a parlay with the NFL season somehow? I bet you could do it. I don't know exactly what that bet would look like, but you can go check it out on FanDuel, everybody. It is fantastic. Right now, FanDuel customers as well, you can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit voice crack. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com to shoot your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. And just like that, everybody, we're back here, Locked On Padres. As always, we're thriving and vibing on this Friday afternoon, morning, night, Saturday, whenever you're listening to this, here with Michael Baumann of FanGraphs talking about Jackson Merrill. I also want to mention really quickly that Jose Tabata, if I'm not mistaken, is the same fellow who has one of the most infamous moments that I've ever watched involving one Max Scherzer. Is this the same player? I believe, right? It was on Pittsburgh. I'm like 100% sure.
What's the moment you're talking about?
When he leaned into the pitch to break up the no-hitter, or the perfect game, I should say. Do you remember this?
Might have been. I don't remember this happening, but a lot of weird stuff followed this guy around. So
there was a very weird career, but even still, like the players that you mentioned, those guys, you went into a stat walk plus rate, right? I want you to just talk about that rate really quickly, because this isn't something that I don't think everyone is as familiar with, as opposed to just the regular walk rate that Jackson Merrill had last year.
Yeah, you were right. I just looked it up. He did lean into a pitch to break up a perfect game. So, that's in the realm of possibilities for young Jackson Merrill. So yeah, walk plus. This is something that you can get into. And I would, since you had your ad read, I'll plug FanGraphs memberships. You can do
Go for it.
If you become a member of FanGraphs, not only do you get ad-free browsing and you get the metered paywall taken away, but you also get all sorts of custom data tools and custom scoreboards and stuff. So one of the things that you could do is what I did, which is go into our plus stats. And, I imagine most of your listeners are at least somewhat familiar with OPS plus or WRC plus.
Mm-hmm.
And what that is just takes the number and adjusts for offensive environment, and in a lot of cases, park factors, and scales it to 100. So 100's average, 110 is 10% above, 120 is 20% above, and so on and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
And walk rate plus is exactly the same. We don't use it because walk rate is a pretty intuitive number. You don't really need to have it scaled for anything, but I just use this for this piece because I was going over a 20-25 year period, the walk rate in the league changes. And I think, and also like you look at, once you get down to a certain level, you think that the difference between a 4.5% walk rate and a 6% walk rate is not that big. It's like barely a percentage point. What is that? Like it's like 10 walks a year or something like that. When in reality, it's huge. Like that's a big deal is, it's an additional third, it's 1.5 percentage points, but it's 33%. And so I just thought this was, walk rate plus, it might be the only time I've ever used it in 2.5 years at FanGraphs, but I thought it illustrated the difference between average and below average, and like really bad, unsustainably below average, better than just using the raw walk rate. Cause you think of a 1% or a 1 percentage point difference between two guys' walk rates, it's actually a much bigger deal than that.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I think that with those numbers, it's really helpful because, again, like, I appreciate it. I appreciate using the buzzword of talking about Mike Trout and Gunnar Henderson, Corbin Carroll, Carlos Correa, Julio Rodriguez. But sometimes when I watch and hear about comparisons, I do get a little bit annoyed when it's like, guy who shoots from far from the 3-point line. He's Steph Curry, for example, right? So I do find this a lot more useful. And again, these players are very good. Michael Harris, even with the decline, and I talked about this for listeners who didn't listen to my episode previewing the Zips projections that you guys did over at FanGraphs as well. Everybody could go check that out. That one of my things is Jackson Merrill's season, like I compared it, and if you talk about Michael Harris, that's still, he declined, right? Declined though. I use that in air quotes, right? Like he's still been like he was a 3.8 win player the second season, and that was when he was hurt, and last year he was hurt too, and he was still 2-win player. Like I think what is so fascinating to me is, I want to touch again on this before we get into that, is you said like how the Padres really need him to be successful. And this is where, let's forget numbers for a second. I think that's what makes me so impressed about Jackson Merrill the most, is that this is a team that has Manny Machado. It has Fernando Tatis Jr., who's probably one of the 4 or 5 most famous players in the league, especially when he's playing well, right? Electric. We all love him on this show. He's my bobblehead right here. I think that it says a lot that Merrill came in and was immediately almost the alpha of this team in a lot of ways, especially when you watch the team play. And as you talked about with the Padres needing him, that's the crazy part to me. This isn't like, hey, hope you're okay, dude. You know what I mean? It's like, this is a team that has traded away a lot of its prospects, notably in the Juan Soto trade, the Yu Darvish trade, the Blake Snell trade, catching up to them a little bit, even to some degree, minor trades like the Adam Frazier one or the Mike Clevenger one and all that stuff, right? Like they really kind of needed a good player, like a guy who came up and was just, I don't know. I can't think of like, I don't want to like slander a player who had like a decent rookie season, but I think that's what surprises me the most, is that like they needed this and he gave them that and more, plus at a new position. That to me is the biggest, if we just want to not use stats, is the thing where you're like, this kid might have something going, because yes, center field easier than shortstop's insane, but that's still pretty wild for you to be able to change on the fly. I think it speaks to his hit tool. I think it speaks to his work ethic and all that stuff too. I was not surprised that he was a better batter than Trent Grisham, but I was very surprised that this guy was an MVP candidate.
Yeah, and I think the importance, you mentioned all the trades, I think that they've ended up having a really strong pitching staff, but that's where a lot of those resources have gone in terms of, even without Joe Musgrove, one of the things that I like about them is that they legitimately go like 6 or 7 deep. And, it sort of depends on what you think about Dylan Cease or Michael King, or how much is left in the Yu Darvish tank, whether they have like a legit number one, the way the Dodgers and the Phillies and the Braves do. But this is it's a very, very deep starting rotation. And that's the strength of the team. And I think that's obscured, and the names and the salaries on this team have obscured how short that lineup's gotten. And you look at Luis Arias, who is the best contact hitter in baseball, probably, but the defense and the power and everything else, this is sort of what I was talking about, is this is also a guy who never walks. And it's a big deal if he's only hitting 320 instead of 350, or 310 instead of 350. Jake Cronenworth's taken a step back. He's a player, go back. I've been talking about him since he was in college. He is a player I love, but if he's not a 4-win player, if Xander Bogaerts has another season like last season, they're really left with Tatis, Machado, and Merrill in terms of impact players. And, you look at the other teams that they're going to ideally be competing with, Atlanta, Philadelphia, Los Angeles, those teams, their lineups go 8 or 9 deep, and the Padres don't. And that makes Merrill all the more important. And even if you add in, like, he's the lefty going between the 2 right-handed hitters right now, the way the lineup shakes out. And, obviously that can all change, but they've built this team to a certain extent to a point where they can't afford to not have him be an all-star level player.
And I think that while I do disagree slightly on the point about the lineup, only just a tiny bit, I think that just depends on what our context is. If your context is like Dodgers and Braves and Phillies, maybe even the Mets, then I'm like, I do see that. But I actually think that the overall message, though, is true. Like, I think that this is a team that it needs to be remembered that Manny Machado has been dealing with an injury, right? Fernando Tatis Jr. has been dealing with injuries and weird off-field motorcycle stuff and the PED suspension. And then Xander Bogaerts, I don't know if his wrist still works, and that might be a problem in the future. So when you take that into account, 40% of their payroll has had all these questions marks about them. And I do think that there's at least some positive regression that can be expected. I don't think Xander Bogaerts is a 75 WRC plus player. I think, but still, like, I think the numbers are a little bit scary, as I've talked about in previous episodes. But the Merrill stuff, it's just talk about like a life raft when you're stranded in some ways. And I don't think the Padres offense would be, White Sox level, but is it an offense you can win with? I question that, because then it becomes a thing of, we need Tatis to be an 8-win player for us to be good. We need to be Seattle, where we're not going to spend any money because money. So we just have to hope Julio Rodriguez is a 9-win player every year. I would rather not be in that situation, even though I think Seattle's pretty good. And I think the Padres are very lucky to have him. Michael, the article is fantastic. Everybody go check it out on FanGraphs. We're going to talk a little bit more about some storylines for the rest of the National League, especially the National League West, that you might be keeping an eye out on for in just a minute. But first, just a word from some of our sponsors. And just like that, everybody, we're back. Final segment here of Locked On Padres. Remember to go follow me on Twitter /X at Blue Sky at Javipeno, JAVIIPENO. Also, go check out and subscribe to FanGraphs and follow Michael's work on there as well. Let's talk a little bit about National League, man, because this has been a weird one. This has been dare I say, the division, specifically the NL West. I've been making this joke on this podcast for a while that it's the only division that apparently likes to try. In Major League Baseball, especially, I guess, the AL East. You get it. I understand that the Mets made a big signing, but for the majority of the past few seasons, with the Dodgers, with the D-backs, with the Giants, frankly, they may not have been successful in some areas. The Carlos Correa contract, the Aaron Judge offer, weirdly not trading 3 top 5 pitchers, and when they had the chance and not getting anything from them, but they are still trying. There still is some effort there. What are some things that you're looking out for in the National League West? Because I think that this division is just going to be a rocket ship of competition basically all year.
Yeah, I agree. I think that it's a situation where if we were still in the old unbalanced schedule where you play your division rivals 19 teams a year, I think this could be like 115 loss Rockies team, just because the rest of the division is so good. I think you don't need to be told about the Dodgers, but the 3 teams behind them, I thought the Diamondbacks had an incredible offseason. I think, I'm very eager to mock the sort of throwback Buster Posey front office and that the Giants have, but at least in the short term, those moves are going to help them win. Willy Adames is really good. One of the other things I wrote this offseason is that they could be getting a potential star back in Jung-Hoo Lee, who barely played for them last year. Like, if you just look at who was available on the market, like, he would have been like the second or third best position player who changed teams. And so, saying that's like a new signing is sort of easy to mock. And they've got a bunch of players that I like anyway. Elliot Ramos, Lamont Wade is just an on-base machine. And then their starting rotation, I don't know how much how much tread is left on the Justin Verlander tire, but Logan Webb's a monster. Robbie Ray, Jordan Hicks. I think Kyle Harrison's got a lot of potential, even though he got kicked around a little bit last year. That could also be a really, really good rotation. And I think the Diamondbacks are nestling up right now. I think that the National League is Dodgers and then Braves, Phillies, Diamondbacks in a cluster right here. And then there will be, you add in the Giants, the Padres, and the Mets. And out of those 7 teams will take up 5 playoff spots. And so, it all depends on stuff like, does Jackson Merrill find another gear? Does, who suffers an injury? Does Lee come back and hit 300 with power, or does he get hurt again? It's just all that stuff that's only going to reveal itself over time. Does Chris Sale hold up? Does Spencer Strider come back, and when, and what does he look like when he does? And, it's the only team. And for that reason, I think the Dodgers and maybe the Braves are the only teams that I feel like are locks to make the postseason, because those, just that rush for the wild card spots is going to be so interesting.
Mhm.
It's going to be so competitive because each of these teams, there's a lot of interesting styles make fights matchups too.
Mhm.
In terms of the Phillies starting pitching versus the depths of the Braves lineup. The Diamondbacks, what their rotation looks like, some of their guys, we're talking about like cycles and what do you do when losing top pitchers like Zach Allen and Merrill Kelly are both going to be free agents at the end of the year. So is this we saw the Diamondbacks sort of roll over Christian Walker into a trade for
Yeah.
Josh Naylor. How does Walker was such an important part of that team, both on the field and off. What does that do to their clubhouse dynamics? Does it just moving the platoon advantage from a right-handed hitter to a left-handed hitter? What does that do to their lineup? They've also got a lot of reinforcements coming up, so it's like I said, 7 teams for 5 spots. I really wish we could just write the NL Central out of this, but unfortunately, we have to give them a playoff spot. I guess the NL Central is not as bad as the AL Central, but
yeah. I mean, look, the Cubs, they're trying. You know what I mean? Like, they've got some players. Seiya Suzuki's fun. Seiya Suzuki's fun. I do think that there's a couple things. I agree. I'm so glad you brought up Jung Ho Lee. And frankly, Lamont Wade, whoever would have made fun of me for really wanting the Padres to trade for last year. But I think that with the Braves, I think that they're a lock. And I know that some people are like, well, they only added Jurickson Profar, my beloved. I love you so much and I miss you. But my thing is, it basically took that entire team, absent I'm blanking on his name. Give me 1 second. Absent the DH. Give me 1 second. Marcelo Zuna having a down year, including an ACL injury for Ronald Acuna Jr., for them to still make the playoffs. So I think the Braves are going to be absolutely sick. D-backs is I've been really high on them. I wrote about this for Just Baseball as well, that if anybody wants to check out their win total, it's at 85.5 right now. Shout out FanDuel. Or at least when I wrote the piece, it was that this team has been to the World Series and it won 89 games last year. 89 games when Corbin Carroll forgot how to play, or at least was adjusting sophomore slump for the first half. Their entire rotation basically got hit with an Oppenheimer, right? Like, just got completely nuked. And I mean, maybe I'm crazy, but I don't think Jordan Montgomery is a 7 ERA guy. I think it's going to be helpful to have a low 4s or high 4s, middle 4s guy, even if I'm a little bit worried about how he progresses going forward. I just think it's going to be helpful having him, Gallen, Merrill Kelly, all those guys. I just don't know what I'm missing about Arizona. I'm really scared of them. They just extended Geraldo Perdomo as well. Ketel Marte's great. They got Randall Grichuk for nothing, right? Like, I just don't really see how people are missing on that team in particular. But
it's kind of turbo Padres in the rotation.
Okay.
I think is even better. It's definitely better at the top, but I think it's even deeper. And again, it's a short lineup. Marte, I think, is the most underrated player in the league. And Carroll's a guy who is going to be in MVP conversations from, going forward. And apart from that, there's not a ton. Like, I like Lourdes Gurriel, I like Eugenio Suarez, I like Gabriel Moreno. I'm not a huge Perdomo fan. I think that there's a lot of downside with that bat, but he's a solid player. There's not a whole lot of thump to that lineup. And, you mentioned Randall Grichuk, like, great. Like, I guess he's an okay short side platoon guy.
$1 million, or 1
yeah,
year,
no,
5
like,
million,
for what he is, like, obviously I take him on my team, but they need another bat. And, but that's it. It's, you take, a lot of the same criticisms of that I just levied against the Padres lineup and the Diamondbacks lineup also apply to the Braves rotation. And so, it's, just like I said, styles make fights, and the Dodgers are the only team that I would be absolutely shocked if they made the playoffs if they miss the playoffs out of those 7.
Yeah, me too. The Dodgers, less talked about them, the better, as far as I'm concerned. No bias whatsoever.
I'm trying not to. I appreciate
it's okay.
You guys
it's
are
okay.
probably sick of them at this point.
I mean, frankly, they help the video, the podcast episodes do numbers, just because I'm like, hey, I kind of wish the star players signed elsewhere, and then you get yelled at, I guess. But that is the internet, my friend. And speaking of the internet, if anybody wants to go follow Michael, you might be wondering, you could go check him out on Blue Sky. And I want to ask you, you have a picture of a little
Oh.
furry lad. I messaged this over the email, and I've seen this character like once or twice elsewhere, but I don't know where. Firstly, I'm a big fan of not using or using cartoon pictures. I have Stitch as mine personally on a little surfboard. I would prefer people not see me as much as possible. I don't want to subject them to that. But why this furry creature in particular? What made you choose this
So
mouse holding a dandelion?
When I signed up for Blue Sky, I didn't think it was going to be like important professionally, and so I just didn't have, I'm an old guy, I'm not on, I'm married, I'm not on dating apps. There's no reason for me to have pictures of myself lying around, so I didn't have any on my phone or on my laptop when I signed on, or when I logged on. But I did have a picture of Che Barashka, who's a Russian cartoon character, like basically the Soviet Mickey Mouse. That I'd used as my Slack avatar at the Ringer, and I was like, "Yeah, I'll just use this until I come up with a better idea." And almost 2 years later, that still hasn't happened. I should find a picture and actually throw it up there. So that's a good reminder that I need to put that on my to-do list for this weekend.
If you guys want to see whatever that Russian little Mickey Mouse,
Che Barashka,
Barashka, man,
he's very cute. He's fuzzy with the big ears, and yeah.
I'm a big fan of like the Russian animated creatures that apparently like will pop up on my timeline every now and then.
So you should search for the Russian Winnie the Pooh.
Oh God.
They had a basically like just Winnie the Pooh with the serial numbers filed off in the Soviet Union. And so like a lot of the characters are the same. But Winnie the Pooh sounds like he smokes 3 packs of Marlboro Reds a day.
Based on the picture I Googled, it looks like he does too.
Yeah. I mean, it's hilarious. So I would encourage anybody who's out there who has an interest in the history of cartoons to go just Google Russian Winnie the Pooh, and you'll be in for a treat.
Absolutely do that, everybody. And with that all said, that about does it for today's episode of Locked On Padres, the only pod maybe better than the Padres themselves. Remember, subscribe to the pod wherever you get your podcast from. Follow me on Twitter again, one last time, Twitter/X and Blue Sky at Javapeno, the best handle in the baseball game, if I do say so myself, JAVIIPENO. Also, follow Michael Baumann on Blue Sky and check out his work at FanGraphs. He does excellent stuff, recently writing about the Blue Jays scoreboard, which I have not read yet, but I mean, do I need to say anything else? I'm in. I'm already in. So everybody go check that out and leave any comments, questions
if
at
you're
all
in
those places.
Can I plug one specific article?
Yeah, go ahead.
A week ago, anybody who's out there who watches Love is Blind on Netflix, 2 of the guys on this season played college baseball at the University of Minnesota. And I went back and went through both of their college careers in exhaustive, exacting detail. Padres fans who are watching the show and think that Ben is a little sus might be interested to know that he went 4 for 13 in his college career off Matt Waldron.
Really?
Yeah.
How about that? My beloved. I love you. I love Matt Waldron.
He couldn't get Ben out. So
that's funny. I guess we're cursed no matter what it is, ladies and gentlemen. Go check that out. And again, leave some comments, questions for Monday's mailbag episode. But until next time, stay safe and, of course, stay faithful, my Fire Faithful homies. Take care.